Welcome to another podcast of Raw Conversations. We were going to be sharing insights and having some really meaningful conversations with some amazing people in the health and wellness space. I'm your host, Sharon Gannon, the founder and CEO of FoodNerd, Inc. And today's guest is Holly Skodis. She's a registered yoga teacher and has many certifications in her practices. And she has a podcast that's called Yoga is Vegan as well, as an incredible website where you can really kind of get lost when you dive into it, because there's just incredible people that she has hosted on there. And she's been featured in a ton of vegan and yoga magazines and online avenues. And she's really kind of having this awesome conversation about merging the world of veganism and yoga. And we're excited to have her on here. We think it's a perfect blend for everybody that's most likely listening is either vegan or thinking about it, or you do yoga or meditation in some way. And so I'm really excited to have you on, Holly. I think this is going to be an awesome conversation. So welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I love what you guys are doing. I love that your food is sprouted, because that's something that we talk about a lot on the podcast and stuff that I have gotten into as well. So I really love what your company's about and what you're doing, and I'm really happy to talk to you today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, no, sprouting is literally like one of those things that once you have no idea what it is, and then once you realize and you learn about it, you're obsessed, and you just, it's such an exciting connective process, and it just brings you back to nature in so many ways. So if you're listening and you don't know what sprouting is, make sure you check out our website where we really kind of dive deep into what it is, because I promise you're going to get hooked and it's going to change your life. But Holly, I have some general questions about, I don't know which came first, if it was vegan and then yoga, but if you kind of want to dive in and just give us a little bit about your background and your journey for both, I'd love for you to tell us all the things.
Sure. They kind of came together at similar times, sort of, or at least the timing of me becoming a yoga teacher. And so the reason I got into veganism sort of came later, but whole food plant-based came first.
Got it.
And you're probably picking up that siren. There's a siren going outside. I apologize for that. But anyway, when I had my first daughter, my health started kind of changing a bit. Like I was getting markers for higher blood pressure. It was kind of in that medium zone, that like caution, if you don't switch something up, you're going to be in trouble zone. So I was getting those markers, and a lot of things had kind of gone haywire, especially after having kids, and like your hormones get screwed up. You're not getting a lot of sleep. Your system's just really taxed. And when it's not at its optimum, you're going to start to see things chip away. And so I was getting a lot of anxiety. I was getting insomnia, like at its worst. I couldn't sleep for 3 days. It was pretty terrible. It gets really dark for 3 days. Your head goes somewhere really nasty. And kind of prior to that, just to set the foundation, I grew up in an abusive alcoholic home. And my father, who I still loved very much, ended up essentially drinking himself to death, or almost death, and then dying with lung cancer for cigarettes. So I watched somebody who I loved doing all kind of the wrong things, right? Not eating the right foods, drinking like an insane amount of alcohol every single day, owned his own business, could get away with it. He was a PI and liked to pretend he was Magnum PI, and just kind of had that like old vibey, like burgundy kind of smoky filled room that you envision. And so that was kind of his reality. And when I was in my, late 20s, he ended up going into a coma for liver failure. And yeah, it was pretty scary. And I was close to him. And essentially, although I don't know as if I really agree with it at the time, he got shortlisted for a liver transplant. I don't know if they still do that. That was a while ago. But if you get to the point where you're in the ICU in a coma, you get pushed up to the top. And, lo and behold, we're all thinking like, well, maybe he'll switch his ways, or like this is like your second lease on life. Long story short, gets the liver. 2 years later, doesn't quit smoking, gets lung cancer, and then we go through another 2 years of somebody being really sick. So it was like a period of 4 years of watching someone slowly, die based on lifestyle choices, which, although it was a hard lesson, it was a really important lesson, and one that I think kind of set me on the trajectory to where I am now. And then
Yeah.
after that, my husband's mom, who also, she smoked like 3 packs of cigarettes a day. And I don't know, like to smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day, it's like a full-time job. Like I think you have to have one going and lighting one as you're putting the other one out. That's a lot. All in one day. And she, same thing, not a lot of great choices as far as like, drinking a lot of dairy, eating a lot of hot dogs, not moving around, that kind of thing. She gets pancreatic cancer, and we watch yet another person go down. And so here we are, new parents, and I'm looking at just kind of going, well, our genes aren't great. Here I am struggling with these things. We can't rely on, oh, our parents lived to be whatever old. We know that things can happen with a turn of event. And what I did learn over the head was what you put into your body, what you put into your mind matters. And that was really the big takeaway from that. And so I started doing a little research. It led me down to the path of the China study, reading that and watching Forks Over Knives. So this was like 2010, 2011, that kind of era.
Okay.
And so at that same time, I had been doing a lot of yoga and enjoying it. And there was a teacher training going on at the studio that, a friend of mine and I were constantly going to. And we thought, okay, we're going to become teachers. And having read a little bit about yoga, I knew that the ancient yogis were vegetarian. And I thought, well, okay, here I'm learning about all this stuff I should be doing for my health and trying to switch, what we're doing to become healthier. And, you know, if yogis were vegetarian, I'll start by going vegetarian first, and I'll commit to it for the duration of the training. And so that's kind of when it all started. And about 6 months into it, or 3 months into it, I became about 95% whole food plant-based. And then the vegan switch didn't come till about 2016. So I'd kind of like gone
Wow.
vegan and then fell off, and then, had those moments where I like to say like cheese happened. Like I used to think that was funny, but now as a vegan, I feel differently about it. So that was kind of a switch in my heart and consciousness. And that happened when I did an advanced teacher training with Dharma Mittra in New York. And at that point, they required everybody who wanted to do the training to commit to being vegan for the duration. And it was hard with a sattvic diet and very specific things that we had to do for 6 months. But it was really one of the best things. So that's kind of how those two came together in my life.
Wow. So they literally merged the same exact time.
Kind
Like
of,
one
yeah. Like one just
inspired the
made
other, and
sense, and
yeah.
vice versa. So,
Wow. Well, that's amazing. I mean, so you've been on this journey for a while now. So I
yeah.
mean, it's definitely a solid decade that you've been, kind of seeing the physical exercise aspect of yoga, but then also the physical aspect of being vegan, and then the emotional tie between the two. And so many questions I want to ask, but I think one of the first things that you touched about that I want to kind of dive into is like your why, because to me that's the most important thing. Is that whatever you do, whatever excites you, it's the why that comes through and what really touches people. And so, you know, your father and how seeing that impacted you is, I think something that was like really powerful in what you said. And, if you had to say, what's your main why for starting this podcast, for starting to, for having, 71 people on your podcast, like what drives you to do that?
I think the biggest driver is back to that first teacher training. And it was like, how like you plant seeds with other people as vegans, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're
Yeah.
not going to make somebody vegan, but you might spark something that sparks something else. And the first day of my teacher training, I was like, not made fun of to the point of it being uncomfortable and terrible, but I was given a really hard time about going vegetarian for the training. The teacher, believe it or not, rolled her eyes at me. And she was very sarcastic in nature. And, it's just like, oh, brother, here she is, like trying to connect to this spiritual thing. And it pissed me off. Like, I'm not one, it's when I commit to doing something and I take it seriously, it's hard for me for somebody to then like ridicule it because I wouldn't do that to someone else. And I think it was that ridicule that I went on to realize like, oh, this happens at a different level of being vegan in many different situations. And what I uncovered was there was this vast silencing that is no different than the silencing that happens through our just society with veganism. I think it's like subtle silencing, but that happens with vegan teachers. And there are a lot of yoga teachers who aren't vegan, who just like anybody else who isn't vegan, gets it sometimes upsets them for a variety of psychological reasons. And it may not even be conscious and it may not be mean heart spirited or mean spirited. You know what I mean? It's just something that kind of exists. And what I realized, so there was a huge section of us vegan yogis who had really made that connection to the tenet in yoga of ahimsa, which means to not cause harm to other sentient beings in your thoughts, your words, your speech, your actions, right? So you're trying not to hurt other beings, and yet here yoga teachers are, going and eating chicken or whatever they're doing, or having retreats, and you see this like, oh, but it's a foodie retreat, and just kind of not getting it. And then there's this other smaller group of people who've committed to this way of life, who really felt like, whoa, we don't have a platform to speak about it. And so that's what I saw Yoga is Vegan as being a platform of inspiration for other people, and not to ridicule, make other people feel bad about not being vegan, but to give a platform where we could all kind of talk about why that connection has happened, because everybody's path is different. Everybody else can be inspiration to someone else. And, my story is my story, and it'll speak to some people, but a collaboration in a community of stories is way more powerful, I think. And so that's really what kind of sparked it. And it was a little scary at first because I was like, if I draw my, the line in the sand that I'm a vegan yoga teacher, I'm going to get, isolated by a lot of people, a lot of, yogis. But what I found was actually the opposite effect happened, because something that we look at in yoga is like when you lean into your true nature, into your dharma, your purpose, then all of a sudden things open up. And that was the experience that I had. But like I said, I try to keep that platform as open as possible so that it is a place where people can feel safe to listen and not feel like it's preachy or judgmental.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, no, like it's weird because you would think people would be like, oh, there's yoga teachers that are vegan, but for you to have experienced, that like moment of kind of shame, that's where the universe was like, actually, no, that feeling that you had was the universe kind of like giving you that like courage to say there's people that are going to feel this exact feeling and you can help them through it. And I love that. That's like, so, yeah, that's so powerful.
It takes a while to pick up on it. You don't know at first, but it's always those moments where you get upset about something or rocked. It's always those moments that are like your life-changing ones. They may feel crappy at the moment,
right?
But they're always pivotal points.
Huge. Yeah. And that's kind of like where, I think yoga really helps with that, because for me, like when I do yoga, yoga is so subjective, it's different for everybody, but when I do yoga, sometimes it's half the time I'm just sitting on my mat, and whether I call it meditation or yoga, or whether I go into a flow after or before, it's sitting in that stillness where you can, like, those moments of like hardship are brought back to you, and then it's like those moment of reflections where it's like, oh wow, like, that's why I felt that. And that's why, like, so you may not feel it, like you said, right away, but you will feel it. And yoga, I think, yoga is kind of how I got into like meditation. And to me, I just, they're so interchangeable to me just
Yeah,
because of the way
absolutely.
I use them. And that those are the moments, like when I know, and this is, you could probably attest to this. When I know there's some reason I'm avoiding my meditation for the day or my yoga, it's because there's probably something I don't want to address, or there's something that I don't want to sit and face. Or there's something I
Ah,
know that
okay.
as soon as I get on the yoga mat and I have to like actually just quiet myself, um, I usually know that there's something that I'm avoiding, or there's something that needs attention. And so the days where I feel like I'm actively like, oh, I'll do it later, or, it's those days where I'm like, I should do it right now. There's something that's like coming through, and it's usually those moments that are hard. But those are the moments where you grow. And that's like one of the things that I have always seen food as that tool. Like,
Yeah.
when there's something that you're very addicted to, or there's something that's like you feel has a power over you from a food perspective, there's usually something really big behind it. And I've always, kind of, it's tough. Like, food is the biggest addiction on the planet. Because it's needed to sustain life, we ignore the addiction part of it and the emotional side of it. But sometimes, it's one of the most painful things, is to sit there and realize, like, why am I eating this? Is this actually good for me, or am I doing it
Yeah.
for other reasons? And
Oh
I
yeah.
think that merging your diet like you did and yoga at the same time, you were probably flooded with a ton of personal awareness and insight that, I think together are the most beautiful combination. So I hope that a lot of people, like, I don't know if if there's like a challenge that you do, but I hope people try it together at the same time, because that's like a shock. That's like a very intense shock to your consciousness in one short time. Even if it's like 4 days, just do yoga every day for 4 days and go vegan for 4 days together,
Yeah.
and see what unravels, because some things will start to unravel, and those conversations you'll start to have with yourself, and it will probably be very intense. But yeah, so I guess some of my questions, I kind of want to dive into the food aspect of your vegan journey, and how, because you said in 2010 is when you started going vegetarian and you started yoga, but
Yeah.
you didn't really connect with the vegan and the compassion aspect of it until like 2016. And
Yeah.
what do you think? What do you think caused that? Like, what was your moment of, oh my God, this is
I,
way bigger than food?
well, I mean, I think I connected to it. I think I just didn't commit to it prior
Got
to
it.
2016. And I think, that's the way when you look at society. And one of the problems I see sometimes in vegan communities, it's like sometimes people fall. Think about going vegan, like
Oh,
learning how to walk as you're a kid or riding a bike. Like you don't get scolded because you fall,
right.
but you do online sometimes.
Oh,
And
yeah.
all of a sudden, people are very emotional, and it's just like, okay, for me, it wasn't overnight. Like you'll meet vegans who are like, "Oh, I looked into the eyes of this bunny and I knew I was the same as the bunny." Not at all over here.
Mhm.
Nothing.
Right.
Okay. I, and that's what yoga's about. Yoga is, it's you had said earlier about, sometimes I feel like meditation is yoga. It is yoga, because if you
Mhm.
look at the path of yoga, right, we're trying to essentially merge this, getting rid of the separateness, this like false ego, this false sense of self, and realize that we're all from that same energy source, whether you look at it as divine energy, or we're all as one, or we're all beating from some similar, you know, uh, energetic level, however you want to relate to it. That's the path. The path is to union. And the way
Mhm.
to that path has different gates. So there is something in the Yoga Sutras called the eight limbs of yoga. And it's the eight different ways that you can get to the same path. And yoga as we see on Instagram looks like poses and, foot behind your head or handstanding or all this kind of crazy stuff. But that's just one of those limbs. There's also the limb of meditation. And And while we're going through this experience, and meditation is really more important. Originally, yoga was four postures, four seated postures that were preparing your body to sit and meditate. So, and you'll hear different teachers say, it comes in at different levels and you can get to it different ways, which is absolutely true. But essentially, we're like taking on that hard outer physical shell and we're breaking it down to that inner core. And so, yeah, it makes sense that food relates to it because these are all just different ways of expressing that inner beauty that lies within all of us, that ability to not want to be hurt or to hurt others. I think somewhere in all of that, I kind of fell against your question a little bit, but I think it was when did you make that connection exactly? But I think it was gradual. It was gradual. And then I would go, okay, I'm vegan. And then somebody would say something like, well, the leather already exists because they killed the cow anyway. And then that would just kind of like derail me. Like I had so many ups and downs that it's a process. It's a practice. And I see the practice of eating the same as I see the practice of yoga. I see the practice of abstaining from buying, animal products, the same. It's all just the same extension, going to the same place, just different avenues to get there.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. Like, because it really is. I mean, and just because, one particular person's path may be this plus this, it doesn't mean that somebody else's path is going to be that, or they may merge in it at a different time. Because I think one of the things that is difficult about going vegan for not just health reasons, but really going to reach that unity place of oneness and just compassion, is that you feel automatic that defense mechanism from everybody, and you feel so like targeted, and like everywhere you go, at dinner, just everywhere, it's like people want to know why, and it's usually not because they actually want to know why. They just want to know why you're different from them, and not actually get to like, no one really wants to hear because of compassion and cruelty. Like people shut out immediately. They're like, no, I don't want to hear it. That's why I don't watch it. And which it's hard, because once you're open to that and once you have that level of empathy, it's difficult for vegans. It's a very lonely time. So, and especially there's such a huge community now, but in your inner world, you're still most likely one of the only people around you that are, right? Especially, like I'm from Buffalo, right? That's upstate New York. And very different scene when I was in New York City, and, California is a bigger scene there. But even no matter where you are, even if it's a city that's very plant-based, your immediate people around you most likely aren't. And so you're always going to be alone in that emotional place. And one of the things that I've kind of realized is that people who do yoga and aren't necessarily vegan, there's still that connection. Like you could still find that similar underlying connection of like, they get it, even though you're at different paths and different levels, you can still feel the overlap of, hey, we're on this journey of just self-awareness and like connection and oneness. And so I imagine most people that you come across that are both yoga teachers and vegan, it's like family reunion when you guys are probably together.
It's so easy. It's so much fun. That's like when you're doing an intensive and you're surrounded by everybody doing the same thing. And then it's hard when you leave an intensive. Like every time I do the Dharma trainings, I've done 2 of the upper level advanced trainings with him, that you're in the city for 10 days, surrounded, by yoga and vegan food and lots of people and camaraderie. And, it's like 6 in the morning, you're getting there, or 6:45, and you're not leaving till 8 or 9 at night. So like, you're just in it, and it's so much fun. But yeah, it is isolating, and it was extremely isolating when I made the move from Los Angeles to Connecticut, like 6 years ago. It wasn't until like now we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I'm like, well, I've been socially distancing for so long now that like, I'm a pro, but you know, it was different, but then you develop your own community, and I no longer feel so alone. But it's like I couldn't imagine every time I sat down, and it happens almost every time you sit down and somebody's got to ask you about what you're eating, and it's just like, oh, good Lord, like, can we talk about something else? Like, I know you want to know, but you
Mhm.
don't. Like, maybe you sort of do. Like, you can look at it as planting seeds to a certain degree.
Right.
Like, I just interviewed Stu Gilchrist, and it was so funny because he was talking about, like, when somebody asks him what he eats, he just starts labeling every single food he's had, and like, I eat peaches, I eat pears, I eat, you know, going on and on and on
Brilliant.
and on until
Yeah.
somebody stops him and goes, okay, like, you know, because it is odd to
Yeah.
be, you know, on this defensive just when eating.
Hmm.
But I guess that's just part of it, but it is getting easier, and it's certainly now, you know, people are understanding it and more fascinated by it because they see the importance of it. And so, you know, that's okay. That's just part of the process.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. Yeah, obviously at FoodNerd, we're like super focused on, you know, we're super compassionate about, and we love that conversation, but we like to focus on the science side because most of the time, most people, the defensiveness is on that compassion. But if you start talking about the health, and you start talking about the research and the amount of whole food plant-based, doctors that are out there, and the medical community looking at food as a lifestyle tool, in a way more powerful light, I think is opening people's conversations up. So I usually will kind of go there when people say, why are you vegan? I'll say, well, it's mainly health reasons. And then it became ethical and compassion. Instead of, just assuming that every vegan is like this, stereotypical way that they're going to jump down your throat about you being evil for being not vegan.
Right.
I think that whole dynamic is shifting. And I think that, I would say most of our customers, most people that we are on this journey of health with, they're not vegan, and they're just starting to look and realize, like, what have we done to our food, and what does it really mean to eat healthy? And then it's like that path that they're going to go on, is so unique to them because they had this separate journey to it. And one of the things that as I was thinking about this podcast and what I wanted to like dive with you, I started realizing, like, from a biological standpoint, one of the things I think between yoga and just health and your diet, why they're so connected is really it's through the nervous system, right? Like everything is really goes through the nervous system, and like being able to say, like, okay, am I in fight or flight right now? Or am I in rest and digest and at peace? And I think, one of the powerful things about yoga is that it pulls your nervous system out of that flight mode
Yeah.
into that same state. And the thing about food is that, when you start to learn, like, wow, food is actually a tool, where if you can meditate through your food, you can actually impact your nervous system dramatically in that same moment, the same way you can with yoga. And one of the things I did a meditation course this last, early in this year, and we had to choose a different form of meditation. I chose through food. And it was really hard, even though that's my life and that's what I do for a career, having to meditate through each bite, um, which I'm sure that you do, actually, like,
Don't be
not,
so sure about it.
it's one of the hardest things to do, like not listening to anybody, not listening to music, just sitting it in front of your food, looking at it, like tasting it, smelling it, eating slowly, having, like, acknowledging that I'm eating right now, because I'm always grab and go. I'm eating in my car. I'm just all over the place. And
Yeah.
during, it was a 3-month period where I was like, I'm going to force myself every time I eat just to just eat. And it was a very emotional journey for me. Like, I don't think I've ever had so many like tears over food before, as I was just like, I found myself in like these weird moments of gratitude, just like falling in love with nature through what was on my plate. And then also like realizing that, like, usually when I was craving something that I would regret afterwards, it was because I was really sad and something was emotionally not being addressed.
Yeah.
um, and so, I was just curious, your emotional connection with food? Was there something that you realize in your journey of like, okay, I was addicted to this because it reminded me of this person, or because it was a way that I would comfort myself? Is there something like that where it was you
There's a
had that moment?
bunch of them. Like if I'm
Okay.
angry, I'm going for salty like snacks. Like I very rarely will go and have like tortilla chips, but if I'm really pissed off, I'm like, whoa, I always go for them. It's so funny. It's just like, or if you're more sad or fearful, then definitely sweet. It's interesting because it is a long process to figure it out, but something that it's not food quite, but it was with alcohol because when you do the Dharma training, so this last one that I did was my 800-hour training. And
Okay.
so it's a lot. I mean, it's not 800 full hours. It's like it's 300 on top of your 500. That's where they're getting that 800 number, just to be clear. But it's still a lot. It's like
Right.
it's a big practice. And we have like, you go to the city, you're in there for whatever, 8, 10 days, you do your intensive, and then you're on with homework and paired meditation, pranayama, which is the breathing practices. Um, and then your food. Like we have a very specific, there's no onions, no garlic, no spices, no sugar, no processed foods. I mean, the list, like you're just eating whole food, bland food, essentially. There's no caffeine, there's no alcohol, the list goes on and on and on. Um, but what's interesting is during this last one, you're not drinking during it. And so I knew I was doing this training in March. This was, I don't know, year and a half ago or whenever that it was. And the right around Christmas time, I had gone to this party and I'd had a bunch of really crappy red wine. And
Mhm.
I was up in the middle of the night and it was just disturbing my sleep and it messed up my yoga practice. And it was so funny because I spend so much time, and this isn't necessarily specifically yoga geared, but I'm always looking at food and I'm looking at what it does and this and that. And I'm ignoring certain, some of the data on alcohol, right? Just ignoring it. That's going to be my blind spot right now. And what I realized in this process of abstaining from it for so long was that there were 2 times a day when I thought about alcohol. And one, like, just like, oh, am I going to have like, a glass of wine with dinner? Not, breaking out the alcohol, but it would always happen around 3 o'clock. And the
Okay.
second time would always happen between 5 and 6 without fail. And because I was spending so much time meditating and the pranayama and all this other kind of stuff, I went, well, why? What's with 3 o'clock and 5 and 6 o'clock? And then I put it together. 3 o'clock was right around the time that I would be coming into my house, and I had an abusive mom. So it was a time of fear. And between 5 and 6 is when my dad would come home. And I went, oh my gosh. Like, and then when I had that acknowledgement, all of a sudden I had more control about my relationship with when I wanted to drink or not. And it shifted. And so that was probably the most profound because it was something that, you know, I had not put together for years and years and years, and then went, oh, isn't that curious? So yeah, I mean, definitely the emotional level of food. And the other thing I've been doing is, and this has been part of, I was reading a book for a friend of mine she's like pre-diabetic. And I was like, okay, I got to figure out what book I'm going to give her. And it was Mastering Diabetes, which is like, it's kind of more of like an 80-10-10 approach, 80 carbs, 10 fat, 10 protein, essentially, but whole food, plant-based. And I was reading it, and they were talking about fasting as well. And I've been doing a lot of intermittent fasting just through like, just the way I've been eating and eating my breakfast way after lunch. And part of it was this, you could do it that way, or you could do once a week, a 24-hour water fast.
Mhm.
Like, you know what, I'm going to try that. And so I've been incorporating it. In fact, today is one of my fasts. I still have about 3.5 hours left to go on my 24-hour fast today. Um, but I've been doing it once a week. And it's really interesting because when you can do that on a repetitive level, just like any yoga or meditation or any other practice, then you start to build a relationship with it and you start to understand, like, oh, those foods are an addiction. Like,
Mhm.
what does hungry really feel like? Because a lot of times we eat when we never get to that point of
Right.
hunger. And it's really interesting because I kind of take those days to try and shift my mindset a little bit, either towards doing something, to help with the vegan movement or just being in more of a spiritual place. And it's really curious to see you have absence from food, not for a long time. I know that's going to end, and you get over like that psychological fear because there's fear with everything. And it's like, oh,
Mhm.
my God, what am I going to eat? Am I going to be able to do something? Yes, you're going to be fine. Like, you will survive just fine with water for 24 hours. Don't worry about it. Like, life will go on. But it's really interesting because then you get to take a almost meditative or yogic look at your relationship to food.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's, your self-awareness and understanding of of, you know, all of the areas of your lifestyle is amazing. And that's really like, I mean, that's our self-awareness journey. And I think that, it inspires me to want to get back into a routine with myself that I'm, a little bit more conscious of my yoga, my meditation, because I'm really, my relationship with food, it's like we choose to have blind spots, whenever it is, we choose to have those blind spots. And recently, the last like 2, 3 weeks, it's kind of been with my yoga. I've just been, for whatever reason, like, oh, I'm just gonna really focus on this area. But I know that, that's when you're aware, it's like, okay, why am I saying that? Like having that, looking in the mirror and saying, why am I doing this? And I think there's, oh God, there's so much self-awareness that comes from being vegan. But
Yeah.
being a vegan yogi is like a whole nother level of self-awareness. And
Y-
one of the things that you talked about the moments at 3 p.m. and then the 5 and 6, like understanding, like that's where I get so geeked out about pulling in, the medical realm, because that's your nervous system, right? Like that's your
Yeah.
automatic nervous system saying, hey, this instinctual fear is literally like it's biologically wired into you. And the fact that you notice that how many years later, I look at the science aspect of it and I'm like, oh my goodness, like you start to recognize those patterns in the people you love, right? Like you notice, oh, they do this, and when they do this, they want this. And one of the things that I recognized, with myself was, my avoidance of those silent moment times. Like I didn't want to meditate, or I was avoiding doing yoga, is because when I was filling myself with busyness and things that I had to do, and telling myself you have to be working until this late at night, and you can't take a break. I think that's so common, especially in like our time of just people being constantly having to be distracted and like need stimulation every second. I think more than ever, we have the biggest community of yogis, but at the same time, we also have the opposite, which is the most amount of people that are so fearful to be alone and in their silence. And that's, I see it everywhere. And it's a mirror to me to make me want to go deeper with myself. But what is I know you have kids,
Yeah.
you experience with the younger kids and that lack of yoga's not a sexy, cool thing. It is sexy and cool, right? Like it's awesome and beautiful, but sometimes if you can be seen as, oh, I'm doing yoga because I want to look like a yogi
Right.
instead of going deep. So what's your
Okay.
vision for the young generation?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that you said. Like for me,
I know.
going going inward for me or being alone in my thoughts. I mean, I grew up in such a crazy household where if it wasn't for me alone with my thoughts, I would have thought I was a nutcase because that's what I was being told. Like when you're in that situation, then I think like being in my head is a comfortable place to go. So being introspective, that's no big deal. But that was only probably because it was a crutch system or whatever that I used. So it's different and taking time. Like talking about like this, oh, if I'm not productive. Society tells us if we're not productive, if we're not buying things, if we're not making enough money, and I've fallen down those same things with my husband. Like we're older, so we've made those mistakes. Like we've gone through having to have that car and that big house and all this stuff, and then the debt, and then your business, and then like you're chasing everything. But and so there is guilt, this guilt for taking time for myself, or just saying, you know what, this is the time that I exercise. Like, I'm going running right now. Goodbye. But I didn't really understand that till I had kids. And my kids are older now, so they're 14 and 17. But when my girls were young, and that was right around the time when I really started to like my first yoga class that I had ever had was when I was pregnant with my first daughter. Like, so that's when kind of like the stuff kind of opened up a little bit. But when my 14-year-old was 6 months or 3 months old, I will never forget this. And this was such a typical mom, but you could replace that with businesswoman. You can replace that with businessman. Anybody who feels like they have so many other things that are important other than themselves that they have to take care for society or for whatever. So I had walked into my garage to get just to get this little bear out of the car that I had to wash, because I don't know, she probably threw up on it or something crazy, because that's what kids do when they're young. And so I went into the garage. I ended up stepping on a 1/4-inch shard of glass that got stuck up in my heel. And as a mom without any help, because I was raised in a abusive family, so we didn't have sitters and stuff. I didn't trust people when doors closed if it wasn't me. It's like, oh, I know what dark, crazy crap can go on. No way. So we were very protective about that. And here I am, and I'm like, there's something in my heel. It kind of hurts. Couldn't see anything. My husband couldn't see anything. I'm hobbling around for a week, still in pain on this foot. Okay. Carrying my kids, doing stuff. And finally I woke up one morning and I was like, okay, I just made an appointment with a foot doctor. I said to my husband, I was like, you're going in the car, you're bringing the kids, you guys are sitting down there, and I'm taking care of this, because I kept putting myself last. And then it went on to me intimidating the doctor, pretty much, the podiatrist, poor guy, because he's like, I can't see anything. He goes, I think it's glass. I'm going to have to go in and do a surgery. And I like looked into his eyes, because he was worried. I think guys are sometimes a little more scared of hurting, like, you know, a woman than like a female doctor who's just like, you can have childbirth, whatever. I'm just going to like,
Right.
they're like stronger sometimes. And I just looked at him and I was like, look, if you don't get in there and get it out, it's not going to come out. I'm not going to do a surgery. Just go for it. And lo and behold, he pulls out this big shard of glass.
Wow.
But I would have sat there and put myself last had it not been for the kids. So cut to like kids now, you know, I taught yoga for, you know, the kids when they were young, and like kindergarten and first grade. And that was fun-ish, but I don't like teaching kids. I usually refer it to somebody else. And I was like, well, I'll teach my own, but, you know, unless they're older. But what happened to them is, because it's like, oh, your mom's this yoga teacher. They make assumptions about them. Oh, do you do yoga with your mom? And it's like, yeah, my older one and I will handstand together because that's fun. Like we meet for the play. Or like my younger one, I taught her to meditate when she got really angry. Like, just go and breathe, like calm down. But like a kid's meditation. But I think the hardest part is what like society puts on them is like, oh, well, you were born into a family where they do this. You must be like that. And it's like, no. So does that sort of answer your question? Is with
Yeah, no,
yeah.
absolutely. I mean, I think the thing that's really hard about, you know, I would never was not raised with meditation or yoga. And now that I experience it, I'm like, I can't wait to teach my children the same thing, because it's so therapeutic and it's so just, you know, maturing. Like, it just matures your brain, right? Like, we know it does on a scientific level, but also an emotional level. And, you know, it's also like, I imagine like you'd have to ask yourself, like, how much is too much, right? I mean, I like to look at some cultures, you know, for examples of like how much of being a kid and how much allowing those insecure social media, you know, moments, like allow those to happen versus like really kind of showing them the light at, at a really young age. I imagine, I don't have any children yet. And as I'm like getting closer to that age and I'm contemplating how I want to raise children, that goes back and forth in my mind so much. Like I know all this knowledge and I want them to have all this that I had to learn 30 years later.
Right.
How much of it is them learning it themselves and them having to go through that, yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I know people who've done it the other way as well, but I think like when I can get my youngest one to hike, that is her meditation. When my older one who dances is in that zone, that's her meditation. That's her expression of it. They know the tools, and I think the meditation that I've taught them, um, that really stuck with them is when they get really upset. And I think the best way you can meditate with a kid is if they're upset, you just have them sit, assuming it's your kid, you have them sit on your lap and just do what you do, and just close their eyes and just match my breath. Just breathe when I breathe. And it's so simple. Like it doesn't have to look so complicated or have all the the props or the like the attitude about it, but just kind of teach them those philosophies. Same thing, like we're a vegan family, but we didn't start out as a vegan family. And they all like had the room, like you teach them like the basics, and then you let them like be themselves, and they'll come back to what, like, they have tools that in their tool belt. They may not use those tools for a long time, but then they'll go, oh, I remember, my mom, like if she didn't exercise, she was like going cuckoo. Like, I know what I need to do. I need to either do yoga or run or whatever. It doesn't, but I think when it comes to like basic philosophy and how that they treat other people, and that's really the essence or other beings in yoga, that's something that they understand, because that's just kind of the life that we try to live.
Right. That's awesome. I wish you were my mom.
I wish I was my mom too.
You gave me all this wisdom, when I was like 10.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like, I'm sure you have that much wisdom too, because it's just like, it's, for every time we have like this terrible, wait, can I cuss on the podcast? I don't know if
yeah.
Okay, when terrible shit goes on, then like those are your learning points. Like they really are. Like that's how you get wiser. That's why it's like people who connect with yoga are aware that they have something inside of them that feels like they need to open up or fix or whatever. Like I was broken. Like I was on the flight or fight like for 18 years probably before I got off of it. I mean, it was bad. It was really, really bad, because that's how you have to be when you're always expecting something to go really, really wrong when it does. And it messes with you.
Right. That's so funny that you say that. So that's one of the things. So, and I think this is like just part of human nature. Is that when something bad happens, right? And it's usually a breakup or it's something that's really traumatic in your life. That's usually when you get, okay, I'm going to do yoga. Oh, okay. Now I'm going to focus on, okay, I'm going to eat really clean. I don't know what it is, and I'm sure it's just so deep and psychologically just wired into us. But, anytime, I mean, I can mainly relate to like what breakups, right? When something happens or something happens in business and you're not happy with, you're just like, okay, that's it. For like 2 weeks, I'm going to do yoga every day and I'm going to eat really clean, or I'm going to fast. And it's, it's like, I wonder, if there is a way that it's, instead of looking at it like a yo-yo, if I only do this when I need more self-love, and then having, such lack of it in other moments, like how would you advise anybody listening to make it more of a consistent thing? Because I know my nature is very addictive and it's yo-yo. And so I think a lot of people are. So how do you make it like an actual practice that's not just a response because something bad happens?
You know what? It's start with small steps. Like I had read, I'm trying to think of the name of this book, but it was like it's a book on habits. I can't remember what the name of this book was, but it was something I'd read. And the essence of this book was to form a good habit, you need to have something, a goal that is doable. And I've done it with Yoga is Vegan. I've done
Mhm.
it with, just ways that I eat, making sure I meditate. Meditation is actually in my thing. So there's this app called Productive. If
Okay.
you're that like ridiculous about stuff, and I think there are probably free apps, but I like the colors and I think I paid for it. But it reminds you once a day. And so it's like make your goal small. Do yoga for 5 minutes, do 5 Surya Namaskar A's. Meditate for 5 minutes. Work on a new project for 5 minutes. Commit to, something that you can do. Like you don't have to go full on vegan, but like start with, okay, vegan Mondays.
Mhm.
Start something small. Or if that's still too like much, okay, one meal a day. Maybe it's just breakfast. Okay, pull all the dairy and the meat out of your breakfast. Or if you're already vegan and you're trying to like, really clean up your diet, get rid of the processed foods and the oils and all that kind of junk, just make it a tracker about, did I eat clean today? Like and then what happens, or at least what happens for my kind of mind, is you all of a sudden you get a streak and you don't want to break it. And I was like, oh
The
crap.
competitive.
Yeah,
Yes.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like, do I want to drink more or do I want to see my streak go away? And then you're just like, your mind shifts or whatever it is. But I think that was what really helped me develop some habits that I was really resistant towards developing. But honestly, if I don't do some sort of like movement every day, like the monster within comes out. So
Got it. Mhm.
at 2 days, you do not allow me to go 2 days without working out or do it. Like, trust me. There's a big beast in there that I had to calm.
Well, yeah, I mean that really kind of goes back to the self-awareness of being like, okay, I know myself. I know how I was, instead of trying to change yourself in the terms of like changing a behavior is different than changing yourself, right? Instead of saying, I'm not good because I do this. Like, no, like I recognize I get really pent up if I don't do this exercise, and creating a safe, loving space for yourself to say, I deserve, even if it's a 10-minute run, whatever it is,
Yeah.
I deserve a moment of me time. And that's, really what I wanted to like everybody like listening to pull away is that I know like yoga and veganism in and of themselves can seem extreme and can seem like, oh my God, I have to commit forever for the rest of my life. And I have to do like, I'll be judged on this, but they're just tools, right? They're
Yeah.
tools and we only have like one day. We only have today. So if you wake up and it feels right in your heart to do yoga today or to eat vegan or to whatever it is that you're doing, then do it that day. And, being able to like create a space to not be so hard on yourself. I think you and I are probably similar in that, where we're very hard on nature. It's just like
Yeah.
perfectionism and so I think that, people that have that kind of personality, um, you know, much it's very much like a daily competition with yourself. And that's when you were talking, I was like resonating with that. I was like, yeah, I have to make it like a goal, like I'm competing with myself.
Yeah.
Um, and for I have to often step back and say, and it's okay if you don't sometimes,
Yes. Breaking a habit for me is harder than keeping a habit sometimes. Do you find that? Like,
100%.
or because I'm somebody who I hate to sit, like I've got to
Yes.
take my daughter somewhere and I'm stuck in the car for an hour and a half and it's hopefully it'll stop raining, but I'm thinking, okay, I'll listen to a podcast and edit it, but I'm like, oh, I got to sit for like an hour. Like I hate to sit. But so for me it's the yin side of yoga, like that deep stretching and not doing anything. That's what was the hardest part to to do, and it took time, but it was like small steps kind of get you there. And also, especially with like veganism or yoga, it's like finding that balance between not coming down on yourself too hard, like not being upset if you screw up or feeling like somebody's going to judge you, but also not allowing yourself to make too many excuses. You've got to like keep yourself accountable for like, when am I just being too regimented about something? And when am I being lazy?
Right.
Like, both of those things can happen, and kind of trying to find the balance of where those two meet. And that really is what yoga is, right? Steady and sweet are the poses. It's like when strength is met by surrender, that is when it equals complete ease. And it's finding that.
Oh, I love it. So if you had to, I know, and that this whole conversation, I feel like there's been like so much advice that I've pulled out from what you've said already. But I guess if you had to, if you had to summarize, to somebody listening, that what you've learned. I know it's been so much, over the last few decades. If you had to summarize, why pairing and why trying yoga and veganism at the same time, what would you say? Like, why should they do that, and what does that mean? What do you think will be inspired by them by doing that?
I'll give you an incentive for it.
Okay. Perfect.
That
See,
seems to work, right? Two things will happen, right? When you are, and this is going to sound really cuckoo, but I've have interviewed so many people, and it seems to keep coming up the same way. When you are energetically, I'll go kind of crazy first, and then I'll bring it into more of a real example. But when you are energetically eating something that is dead or has had a history of abuse or fear or any of these things that happen when you look into like a slaughterhouse, right? And I don't want to get too heavy on people, but when you look into the history of your food, that energy passes into you. Something you said about being mindful when you eat your food. Like, you're not supposed to eat your food when you're angry. I think it's the Buddhists where like the highest monk is someone who prepares the food, because the food is then a different energy. So if you think about the energy that you're putting into your food, and even if you're vegan, like, is it processed dead food, or is it a vibrant, fruit? Is it a sprout? We'll take it a step further. Is it sprouted, right? Does it actually contain life in it? Or is it, an Oreo, which doesn't really have the same life force on it,
Correct. Yeah.
right? So that is going to energetically, it's going to help connect you on a spiritual level too, because it's going to allow you to have less emotion that is like frenzy, that it's upset. Both of my daughters, when they stopped eating meat and dairy, said this, similar things. One stopped being so depressed, and the other one stopped being so anxious. So we embody the energy on a yogic, like woo-woo kind of level that we eat. So that's one nice reason to pair the two. The second is, and something that I tell my clients when I'm just working one-on-one, and this is not even like, even if it's not vegan, look at what you ate. Like, start being accountable for what you're eating, and then think about how you're feeling. If you're really stiff and uncomfortable, chances are you have inflammation stuck into your muscles, inflammation in your body. That's coming from inflammatory foods. It's coming from foods that aren't giving you, your body, something that you can utilize from a nutritional level. So when you're putting that into your system, your output, which is then your yoga, stamina, flexibility, all of these things are connected. So if you want to be able to stick your foot to your head, or whatever your goal is, or stand on your hands, or do 2 hot yoga classes back to back, look at what you're eating, because you're going to be able to do twice as many classes, and you're going to be able to go twice as deep eventually than the person next to you eating cheeseburgers and fries. I guarantee it.
Absolutely. Oh, that's amazing. Okay, so I think that if you're not inspired to do it, I would challenge you as well to try it. Even if it's one day, do one day of yoga and one day of just putting some amazing vegetables and plants into your body. And if you have any any questions for myself or for Holly, I will make sure that we link all of her information below. But I myself and Holly, we both kind of challenge anybody listening to just try it.
Yeah.
Just love yourself a little bit to try it. And we're both, I can probably speak for you. We're both both of our missions are to help people. And if anybody has any questions about going plant-based or about going vegan or that journey, reach out and let's build up this community together. But Holly, I just wanted to say, I could probably talk to you forever, but I know we can't. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure we will absolutely talk again very soon. And everybody listening, thank you so much for joining another episode of Raw Conversations. Please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe, and visit foodnerdinc.com for more related issues on food and self-love. And Holly, again, thank you so much. And everybody,
my pleasure.
Do more yoga and eat more plants. Awesome. Okay. Thank you.
All right, bye-bye. Thanks so much.
Thank you.